The Spin-Off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold! Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Running a stopwatch today because I have to be back at work.
Yeah, at 1:40.
You've got the stopwatch running.
Yeah,
Annabelle.
let's go.
Are we away? We're off. We're off.
Go.
Let's go.
Tēnā koutou katoa. This is Gone By Lunchtime. Annabelle Lee has the stopwatch running because we have to finish in time for her to get back to work. What have you got going on at work?
I'm producing a series about Māori political legacy. So ironically, I've never known less about what's happening in politics than I do at this moment because I've been so engrossed in that I literally have.
Are you happy to speak at length about Tariana Turia?
Yeah, that's right. I can tell you anything that happened in the 90s.
This is Gone By Lunchtime, brought to you by Flick Electric. You can click on the banner on any politics page on the spin-off and have a look at the sweet deal they can provide to you. I have to begin by issuing a formal apology, which is to say that in the last podcast we promised that we would have new theme music. I can't remember what else we promised. We were very rash, and when I say we, I mean me.
You basically Kiwi-builded our audience.
It's so true.
You made a big promise.
It's huge overpromise. I am the Phil Twyford of Gone By Lunchtime.
It's been reshuffled. Now you're only in charge of intros.
We've split up
discussion will be run by Annabelle.
That's right.
And Tina is going to be in charge of gravelly voices. So.
We were going to have Kenny Rogers, the gambler, in honour of the reshuffle.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we encountered some intellectual property issues there when I took that to our legal department.
Yeah.
But if you're out there and you think you could do a cool jingle, we'd love you to send them to us. Send them to me at toby@thespinoff.co.nz.
What's David Shearer doing now?
Maybe you've got David Shearer. Are you out there? Are you enlisting in South Sudan?
Jamie Strange. Labour List MP.
Jack Tame is
Guitar
quite good on guitar.
I've got the best story. Did you know there's a parliamentary band?
Oh, yeah.
What?
I ran into Louisa Wall at the airport the other day, and she was telling me they have this cool, cross-party band, and they go and do cool gigs together.
Yeah. There's one in Britain, and it's called MP3, and then they added a member, it was called MP4, which I thought was quite a good... It's true. the Westminster band. But seriously, if the parliamentary band would like to...
what is it? Just like an atonal jazz improv kind of found objects and kind of...
No, like...
something you'd hear at the Audio Foundation, just like screeching feedback.
And Martima Davidson's in there.
Uh-huh.
I can't... Shane Ritty, who apparently is an incredible instrumentalist.
Oh.
He's a good guitarist.
I'm very excited
classical
about
guitarist,
this.
I think.
I'm sure it's not true, but I can imagine Trevor Mallard doing Animal from the Muppets style drumming in the back.
Yes.
But instead of using drumsticks, he'd be using babies.
Have they approached Parliament's premier, John Bonham?
Oh.
Simon Bridges?
Oh.
The Dave Grohl of
course,
the New Zealand Westminster
that's his
system.
Whole brand. That's his whole brand, is the long videos drumming.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I think that's most of it. Most of our podcast covered. We can probably... if you do successfully send in a new jingle to us, we will reward you with a copy of, and this is a segue on my part, a copy of the spin-off book, which this very morning we had just done the final press pass on. And it's very cool, I think. But you get a copy of that also if you join up to our spin-off members program, which we launched last week with a lot of fanfare, a lot of excitement, and it's cool. What else do I need to say about that, Tina?
We're going to push the boat out on this. We're going to up the stakes.
Oh.
We're going to send you a signed copy.
Why is that funny?
From the Gone By Lunchtime crew.
Oh, from the Gone By Lunchtime.
A defaced copy.
Yes, we are.
You know you want a little piece of that.
What more could you want? We'll even write you a little haiku if you want. We could collaborate on a haiku. What are we actually going to talk about? We started talking about Kiwi
We're 5
builds,
minutes
so
in, we've got nothing.
How are we going for time?
We're 5 minutes in, we haven't really...
I'm just looking at the list of things that we thought about. We were going to talk about reshuffles.
This was meant to be the pod of delivery. And nothing has happened.
I'd beg to differ. I think we've shown that we have some real aspirations with regard to the...
It's true. We've made a lot of promises about the book.
We've put a big carrot out there for sure.
Yeah.
And we've encountered some problems along the way in this podcast.
We're all carrot and no stick. That's
the procurement.
Let's not talk about Gone By Lunchtime anymore. Let's talk about the spin-off political podcast program, which will still continue.
Yes.
It's still very much alive.
Yes.
But let's just move it away from talking about a particular pod with particular people.
This is an extended metaphor to describe the way that the Kiwi, the housing portfolio has been split into three parts under the reshuffle announced by Jacinda Ardern a few days back, and Phil Twyford has been given, what's he been given? Urban development and planning, and the main part of that is RMA reform. Basically,
and
it's an acknowledgement. And what?
Pop-up stores.
Pop-up stores. Yeah, that's the main thing.
The future.
Pop-up stores. That has been interpreted to various degrees as a demotion, certainly an acknowledgement. I think the Prime Minister went so far as to say that Kiwi Build had, I don't know what word she used, but it had failed to do what they'd hoped it would do. It's been a bit of a
there aren't
fuck
any
up,
houses.
I think is the technical term, isn't it?
I think that's the problem. Not as many houses as they had wanted, i.e. none. Well, 144, none of which were actually built as a result of the Kiwi Build program, some of which were sort of bought off the plans of pre-existing apartment developments, like by our friends, the spin-off's friends at Ockham, some of which were previous government builds from the national government's affordable housing program with sort of Kiwi Build stickers on the front. So Kiwi Build, or the government build program, or whatever it's going to be called, was given to Megan Woods, who's probably, I'd say, the most anonymous, high-ranking minister in this government.
Not in Christchurch.
No, that's true. So she's in charge of Christchurch regeneration, science, and energy. But she was towards she was kind of in the back row when they were banning oil and gas exploration in Taranaki. She hasn't had a huge profile, I wouldn't have thought, and it strikes me as a slightly strange, or at least a kind of unexplained sort of new responsibility for her.
She did her PhD thesis, did she not, in something to do with urban regeneration?
It was the gendered aspects of the Māori migration to the cities. I feel really shocked by that.
I'm really shook, Annabelle.
Wow.
I thought that she was a medical doctor
interesting.
all these times, but she was actually a gendered urbanism doctor.
Hey,
but she's got the prognosis for Kiwi Build.
Would it maybe help to... Oh, I see what you did there. Would it help if maybe the government partnered with like Skyline Garages and Lockwood Homes to get those puppies up?
Richie McCaw.
Just throwing it out there.
What were the houses that he was promoting? I feel like Richie McCaw needs to have a role.
Maybe Richie could be the Undersecretary for...
Helicopters and homes.
I mean, part of the problem is too many people living in garages, I think.
Helipads.
I don't know if that's the solution. But, I mean, this is part of the problem, right, is that often this government is kind of parodied as former student politicians and student council members, and you see this aspect of them in promises like Kiwi Build. Henry Cook from Stuff did a fantastic piece. It was basically an oral history of Kiwi Build from genesis to complete failure. And it started with a discussion by Annette King in the back of a car with Campbell Roberts of the Salvation Army, talking about a much smaller project that the Salvation Army had done. Annette King going, well, that's a good idea. Why don't we do 50,000 homes like that? And Campbell Roberts sort of being a bit sort of looking at her a bit askance and doubting whether that was feasible, and then David Shearer ratcheting up the rhetoric on it and then promising 100,000 houses when it went public. And there was never any real testing or work done to see whether this was achievable. Some good work done by Janae Tribshraeny on interest.co.nz, where she spoke with an economist who said, actually the New Zealand economy is basically at capacity. We can't just vote new houses into existence. We have to have a trained construction workforce. We have to have affordable materials. We have to have land supply. None of this can be done just as a purely government regulation thing. The only thing that government can do in terms of regulating this is getting rid of the planning constraints, which is what Phil Twyford is going to be able to concentrate on now in the urban development area of housing and RMA reform, which will be removing some of those impediments to building, denser or medium density or homes, outside the current urban limits, which has, really stymied the construction of new houses in Auckland. So the other thing that Phil Twyford hasn't failed on, not yet, and actually most people hold out a lot of hope for, is this Urban Development Authority, or UDA, which is going to be this kind of planning czar organisation, which will be able to go in and not, at the margins, compulsorily acquire land, but moreover, bypass the resource consenting process from councils, who do tend to be anti-development, no matter how high-minded their governance, like the Auckland City Plan are, or the Unitary Plan. So that will be something he can work on, and that will probably come out. That will have a much more tangible effect than just voting 100,000 houses to come into existence.
Is that true though, Ben, about all they could do is control the legislation around it and make it easier to get consents and all of that stuff? Could they not have done more in terms of heavy investment into places where you can prefabricate houses and all of that sort of stuff? I mean, for example, the Unitech land's been sitting there for ages. Is that could they have not started whacking stuff up if there'd been a bit more kind of investment in the nuts and bolts side of it? I realise you need a skilled workforce, but the way technology is changing construction, surely we could have been a bit more innovative. And in that regard, it's not solely Phil Twyford's fault, is it? Probably it needed more bigger thinking going on.
There's a couple of things they could have done using the sort of giant checkbook of the state. The first thing would be to just pay for new water connections and roads and infrastructure to allow new houses to go in, because that's actually one of the biggest barriers. They could have invested in, prefab, speculative prefab stuff. I mean, if they wanted to do it in one go, they could have contracted a state-owned construction company from China. It said send 10,000 people over to build a new city the size of Hamilton and just hand it over one lump sum. And that would probably get done, because then you outsource all of the logistical issues to these companies of scale that can obviously do this, because they put up huge cities in China all the time. But then there would be a level of discomfort around immigration, about temporary workforces, about jobs going overseas. So maybe there were political barriers to that. But what they couldn't do... We're
more comfortable just to have homeless people than have all that other stuff going on.
Well, there's a good argument that goes, instead of messing around with all this kind of trying to address these middle market issues just to have a massive state house building program?
I've always thought that, we've talked about this a lot, the focus needs to be on social housing. And if you address social housing, which is where the dire need is, then, in terms of the issue around affordability for first home buyers, that starts to naturally correct itself anyway because the pressure's been taken off.
And in fairness to the government, they have made some progress in those areas, and you feel as though, and that's quite often the line that comes back when criticisms are made of Kiwi Build, that the Prime Minister will point to the progress in state house building, social housing. And so you kind of think, well, if that's working, why not just scale that up and just acknowledge that Kiwi Build didn't work? Meanwhile, on the other side of the house, there was reshuffle action there too, prompted after Amy Adams suddenly had a look at her life and her work and decided that she would not like to be the shadow spokesperson for finance anymore. In fact, not like to be in Parliament anymore, and announced she was going, which just came as a surprise. I don't think that was very.
There's two ways of looking
spotted.
at it. The first is the human way. She's been in Parliament for a long time. She was a senior ranked minister. She was a very good justice minister who did some important reforms in the area of sexual violence and domestic violence. She was probably an adequate ICT minister and communications minister. She had a host of other sort of more minor portfolios, and she may have thought, look, I'm not going to be Prime Minister. I missed out on the leadership last year for National. My heart's not in it anymore, so I'm just going to call time. And other reasonably successful politicians have done that. The other way of looking at it is, in the absence of I predict and betting markets on the outcome of next year's election, it's certainly not a vote of confidence in National's ability to win the election at this stage. If National was going to be in government after the election, she would be the finance minister, which is the most powerful portfolio by a long way. Number two, only to the Prime Minister, gives you a huge amount of power to, pursue your goals in terms of policy. And this is probably not a great sign for how National feels that it's tracking coming up to the election.
And it's not exactly like Treasury's the sexy beast that it used to be, is it, after all the fuck-ups there lately? It's not like, ooh, I want to be the boss of Treasury.
She typed her own name into the Treasury website search engine and it didn't come up with anything. So she saw that there was no future for her. Annabelle, you all right there?
Yeah, just adjusting my chair. Okay. By the way, we're more than halfway through, so...
How are we going?
We're over halfway through.
Okay, we'll keep moving. Then Paul Goldsmith was elevated. There was some that we had kind of about 3 hours to speculate wildly about what would happen to the finance portfolio with National, and could have been Judith, couldn't it? Judith ended up getting reshuffled out of her
infrastructure.
Was that the demotion that you get when you're not getting a demotion?
Well, it was weird.
I'm confused.
There was a very Judith Collins moment.
Is it a passive-aggressive shuffle? That's what it feels like, a little bit passive.
Because infrastructure is not a real portfolio. It's not a real portfolio in government. It was invented under the John Key government and just sort of given to Bill English and then Stephen Joyce. But it doesn't have its own department. It's got, I think, 3 people in Treasury who are the infrastructure unit who just do a stock take of all the government's assets every year. It's not a policy portfolio. Shane Jones has it as a sort of SOP in government right now. Oppositions didn't tend to have infrastructure portfolio holders except in order to ask questions, but it's not a real portfolio. It's a kind of made up one.
Is it kind of like when we had the Ministry of Textiles or whatever it was?
No, it's only new. It's only been around for 10 years because the because John Key was talking about infrastructure in the lead up to the 2008 election, and a promise was that we would have a minister for infrastructure to get this cohesive, coherent plan so that we wouldn't have people fucking around messing up Kiwi Build, because there would be, as they call it, a pipeline of big projects, planning for our future, and with
squirting out our future everywhere.
Yeah, and in the end we got the Waterview Tunnel finally completed, but there isn't a coherent government infrastructure plan. There aren't any new ways of funding these things. Everyone always, under the national government, people talked about private-public partnerships. Now I think they talk about infrastructure bonds, but there's nothing really happening in that portfolio apart from listing all of the bits of concrete and buildings that the government owns, and which makes it all the more puzzling as to why you would take it away from Judith Collins, because it's not a portfolio that gets any action either way. Paul Goldsmith doesn't benefit in terms of how he can hold Grant Robertson to account by having this infrastructure portfolio. I guess it means he can continue to pursue Shane Jones in Parliament, but it does seem like a bit of a slap in the face to Judith.
And when she was asked about it on Morning Report, there was a very pregnant pause, and she said, "Well, I was in a course. There were some messages on my phone, but I found out through the media." And this, in her very Judith Collins-y type way, so I'm just stating some facts. I'm not complaining. Obviously, it's fine, but every kind of dripping with this kind of faux innocence. I don't know what it was. It's interesting. Like it's a constant in that caucus, and it would have been a bold. I mean, Paul Goldsmith is a good fit, right? Like he's got a good grip on that subject. That's fine.
In terms of the people
Judith
in that
Collins
caucus,
Judith Collins is unequivocally, incontestably the most effective opposition frontbencher, right? No one would argue with that.
I don't think that's arguable, yeah.
And so it would have been a big call. It would have been. I'm not saying there aren't any arguments against it, but to go, all right, here you go. Labor's vulnerability has been around finance, largely for reasons of perception, as much as anything else, but it's still a vulnerability. Stick your most powerful parliamentary performer up against Grant Robertson and see how it rolls.
Because
I expect that was given approximately 0 seconds thought, right?
There is this school of thought, the keep your enemies or your perceived enemies closer. If you think Judith Collins is the biggest threat to your leadership, which, I mean, she is, whether she's after it or not, because of her appearance in the preferred PM polls, do you want to, you can either demote them entirely, as was done to David Cunliffe by David Shearer. That doesn't solve any problems because they're in opposition in particular, they're still free to agitate. Or you can sort of buddy up to them, bring them super close the way that Helen Clark did to Michael Cullen after his leadership bid against her. And they created a formidable team. Siegfried and Roy, the guys who did the magicians with the tigers. I mean, eventually one of them got mauled by the tiger, but they had a lot of good years before that. A lot of people were entertained and they made a lot of money. And I would surmise that that's a better outcome than just finding the tiger and picking a fight with it immediately.
Right. So you could drown the tiger, but then no one would come to your show.
That's right.
And you just sink into obsolescence.
Yeah, that said, Paul Goldsmith, I think, will do a very capable job. He's been a good performer against. He's been a good performer against Shane Jones on the Provincial Growth Fund stuff. Robertson, I think, is still getting to grips with the portfolio. He is not being supported by a strong treasury right now. Amazing
he has that
piece
sort
in
of
the spin-off.
He feels a bit like a sort of very effective primary school treasurer, though, doesn't he? Come into my office and I want to ask you a few points about these expenses. There's something a little bit which maybe is good, but it's just he's not a tiger. That's what I'm trying to say.
He's very dry.
He's not terrifying though, is what Toby's saying, eh?
I guess a little bit terrifying. I do find primary school kind of,
I think,
but not in a tiger, terrifying. Not in a way more in a shit. I'm going to have to fiddle my expenses more successfully next time way.
Yeah.
Yeah. On a much more serious subject, Annabelle Lee, the Oranga Tamariki uplift story, which was broken by Newsroom a few weeks ago now. Mm-hmm. You had Tracy Martin on the show, did you?
Yeah, we had her in the weekend.
What do you make of her response to the story?
I thought it was interesting. One of the issues that she raised during our interview is that, in fact, some of the issues that we're seeing here are justice issues, because what we talked to her about in the weekend is parents that do have their children uplifted, once they've jumped through every hoop that Oranga Tamariki wants them to jump through, mothers are losing their kids because they've been in violent domestic, situations, and then their kids get ripped off them, understandably, but, they're not provided any counselling or given the opportunity. They're not, moved as a group to a safe house or anything like that. So they're left to their own devices. They then jump through the hoops, the lady that we interviewed, she'd broken up with the husband, she'd done 9 parenting courses, she had gone and got herself qualified and was a carer, done all of this stuff, and she still couldn't get her kid back. And Tracy Martin says that one of the issues that parents in that situation face is actually a justice issue, which is even if Oranga Tamariki do support the parents getting their kids back, that lawyer for the child can block that from happening. So it was an interesting thing that I hadn't considered, but I still think that it actually doesn't answer the question, which is, we're getting contacted constantly by women who have had their children removed, sometimes in really distressing circumstances, like babies literally getting taken away while they're breastfeeding. And those mothers aren't being given any sort of support or guidance or anything. So it's like, if it's about Oranga Tamariki, if we're to be true to the name of that organisation, and we believe that that whānau and particularly mothers are a part of a child's well-being, you can't take their kid away and then not offer them any support for their supposed failings. So it's a big, complicated issue. But I was pleased that the minister fronted up.
Yeah, yep. And it's that thing, is every single case, the ones that have been covered, every single one has got so many complications involved with them.
Well, yes and no. Like, I think, Aaron Smale's article on Newsroom the other day hit the nail on the head. It's actually not that complicated. It's singular and it's economic. And when people don't have the finances to, make a better lives for themselves, and that's when you get, stuck in these situations. And it's also something that Celia Lashley used to talk about too.
So we've now got this, I've lost count of the number of inquiries that are underway.
Four inquiries.
Yeah. And do you have a sense of whether that is going to address the problem properly, or are they all,
Well, I think it's always difficult when the state investigates itself. It's a bit like the Waitangi Tribunal and, all of that sort of stuff. Like, is it really appropriate for Oranga Tamariki to be investigating itself? Well, it's better than not investigating itself, but I think, at the moment, some of these mothers, they have less rights than criminals, because at least criminals can go to the Court of Appeal if they don't agree with a decision. These women don't even have that right. So I think there really needs to be probably more consideration given to how the whole system works, and perhaps something like the Independent Police Complaints Authority, where there is like a place where families can go and have their concerns independently heard and assessed. And it's all kind of ambulance at the bottom of the cliff stuff though, isn't it?
Well, yeah, by definition this is extreme and urgent cases. Part of the issue is that it's been framed in its current incarnation, this discussion, in terms of that Newsroom investigation. And part of me sort of thinks that you would have a very different public debate if, instead of 30 minutes of obvious traumatic and gut-wrenching scenes of state officials taking away a newborn from its mother, and then, one paragraph sort of discussing, the mother and her partner both have high and complex needs. If instead you spent half an hour discussing the high and complex needs of the parents, and then you just said, and the baby was taken away, uplifted shortly after birth, you would actually get a very different narrative on that. Now, that doesn't, you actually need to look at both things, obviously, but, there has been some pretty wild, especially initially, there were some pretty wild statements that, all uplifts must stop. And I think now that things have settled down, everyone sort of agrees that's not the case. There are children who do need to be protected from their parents. Then some people have talked about, it's a process thing, it shouldn't be sort of a midnight raid. And then there are other issues, involved in that, which is that, parents don't want to give up their kids, obviously. And it's never going to be easy. It's never going to be an easy process. I actually think there needs to be probably maybe even a Royal Commission of Inquiry. Normally I sort of tend to resist those sorts of calls, but at this stage I think there's such a lack of confidence in Oranga Tamariki, especially among Māori communities, that actually there does need to be a very high status independent body looking at the whole practice, not just the Hawke's Bay case, to get some sort of answers.
Yeah, and obviously there are absolutely cases where children do need to be removed from their parents for their safety, but if you are to look at the Hawke's Bay example, there's a mother who's never even had the chance to do anything wrong because her first child got whipped away literally from the maternity suite, and here she is with her newborn, surrounded by very supportive midwives, so iwi that want to keep the family together as well, and her family are all there. It's pretty hard to justify why between the hours of, 9 at night and 3 o'clock in a hospital surrounded by medical experts, that child was in imminent danger, which was the reason that it was, the grounds for which it was uplifted. And what we do know too is that children, and particularly Māori, are more likely to be abused in state care. So we can't just have this sledgehammer approach, preventative approach, that actually ends up causing more damage than the supposed danger that it saves these kids from. And of course there's times when kids need to be removed. There was a story on RNZ the other day about the woman who horrifically abused her children, and the school were aware of it. The oldest child ended up committing suicide, and you have to wonder, where was Oranga Tamariki on that occasion? That might, I don't know enough of the details, but it seems strange that a child in a hospital with its mum surrounded by people is considered to be in imminent danger, and then we have other situations where there really is clear and present danger. Yeah. And they remain in the care of their parents. So
absolutely.
It needs to be a more strategic approach, in my opinion.
And that's why I think there needs to be an actual independent inquiry, not just these piecemeal ones that have been announced.
Well, it does feel as well. We've got we've got a Royal Commission into Abuse and State Care underway. And I think that's probably right, a big query, but there's a definite overlap. That Venn diagram has quite a big intersection in those two.
That's the irony. It's like, here we are having an inquiry about historical abuse in state care when we know that, kids are still being abused in state care. And it's like, why would you just keep it historic when it's ongoing? And what's the point if you're not going to address what's going on right now today, so that we can prevent it happening again? Of course, it's great that there is a historic one, but then there needs to be more sense of urgency to what's happening right now.
Yeah, I think that's why you'd keep it separate, is because, the practices have changed over the years, and you would want to be looking at what exactly Oranga Tamariki's mandate and its operational practices are right now. Oh my God, have we gone over?
We've got to finish. We haven't. How much time have we got? Sorry to cut across you, but we've got to go to we've got a funny topic to end with, and that's death.
Let's go funsies.
Euthanasia was the last one. We don't got time to talk about euthanasia. You've got to go.
Well, the interesting thing about euthanasia is that, I totally understand the desire to die with dignity. Certainly, I'd like to think it would be an option for me should I end up in a horrific situation. Whether or not I actually choose to is another thing, but knowing that you have the mana motuhake and the tino rangatiratanga to decide your own destiny in that situation, I think is important. But then on the flip side, we've got the Waitangi Tribunal Health Report, which shows that, Māori are so horrendously failed by the health system that how do we, there's got to, any responsible person would have to have serious concern about what the potential impacts of this legislation is going to be on Māori. So it's a really important, interesting issue, and I hope that all our politicians put their strap on their big girl undies and their big boy undies and be grown-ups about it.
I don't know if you saw any of the debate, but I watched some of it on Parliament TV, and I was really impressed by the... not uniformly, but it's a conscience vote. And most of the people who spoke, some of them who'd changed their mind, which in itself is quite refreshing in a place where everyone seems so kind of partisan and tribal so often. And talking about drawing on personal experiences, but also thinking quite deeply about philosophical implications. People who have had their, people who, it's kind of interesting listening to middle class people for whom it seemed quite a straightforward issue, hearing from others who've come from different backgrounds or who are exploring issues around, say, tikanga or issues around disability or whatever. Not the kind of religious dogmatic stuff, which I respect but find quite boring because that's sort of very, straight up and down. It's quite a good debate. I should say that what I'm talking about is David Seymour's end-of-life choice bill, which passed its second reading the other night and will now go to a third reading, but it passed with a few people still backing it to go to committee stage who may go back the other way. I think it was 10 votes or something like that, and it was 70 to 50, wasn't it?
Yeah, there's a lot of variables in play. So the New Zealand First caucus will support it if it goes to referendum at the next election, but they won't support it at the third reading if it doesn't go to referendum. Seymour and many of his allies are willing to support the referendum call. Some people, I think probably including the Prime Minister, won't be voting for it to be a referendum, but would vote for it at the third reading in any case. But say if they were to vote, if any of those people were to vote against the referendum SOP, then New Zealand First will drop its.
And then you've got on top of all that Maggie Barry, who's the most vocal opponent of the bill in the House, threatening to put in as many as 100 SOPs, which would be in effect a filibuster on the whole legislative process.
Which would make her the least popular member of her caucus as national MPs try and advance their own private members' bills past this morass of the committee of the whole House. It's interesting because, as a smug urban liberal, I often think that religion and the role that it plays in adults' lives is very similar to a sports club or a high school you used to attend, just kind of passing interest. And in the national government that I worked for, there were 6 Catholics on the front bench at one point. And you started to see just how much of an influence it is, on their day-to-day lives, which, again, as a sort of, urban atheist, agnostic, whatever, I had never really given a lot of thought to, the role that faith plays as an active and real thing in political decision-making for people.
Annabelle, you've got to run. Have you got anything else to add on that?
I'm done.
You're done?
Yeah.
You're through?
I'm done.
Well, thank you.
I got it all out.
I don't know if I mentioned it, but we're going to work on a new theme for the next episode. I want to say a big thank you to Flick Electric for sponsoring the politics section and keeping us going.
They actually bought me a clothes dryer.
To Tina Tiller, thank you, Tina, for producing us and being wonderful in every way. And also, what is it? The spinoff.co.nz/members, and also Ben Thomas and Annabelle Lee Mather, and I'm Toby Manhire. I'm just talking. I'm just keeping going.
It's a great source of.
Fade this out. Fade it out. Fade it out. Fade it out.
Spin-off members.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour government. A podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards the
most radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour government. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on The Spin-Off or wherever you get your podcasts.
Are you curious about how business can be better? I'm Simon Pound, and I host Business is Boring, a podcast where I kōrero with some of the most interesting people in entrepreneurship, commerce, and making things happen. Tune in to Business is Boring every Tuesday, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with Spark Business Lab. The Spin-Off Podcast Network.